Everyone, to another episode of Compressed FM, a podcast all about web development and design with a little bit of zest. In this episode, we're going to talk all about accessibility with our guest, Todd Libby.
Development and design.
It
Because
doesn't
you paused
restart.
it.
Would have guessed when we.
It doesn't restart. What the hell? Why would it?
Hello.
Hold on, one more try.
Can do them both.
Nope, go ahead.
Hello. My name is Amy Dutton, and I am the director of design.
Just in general, not at a company or anything. Just director of design. Done. And hello.
At Zeal. I don't know where I went in my head. I think Leg Hay did the little dancing disco man, and I was so distracted
Gotcha. Yeah.
by it. Just, check it. Yeah, we do have quite a few. I think people will be surprised how much editing happens on the back end. Okay. Hello. My name is Amy Dutton, and I'm the director of design at Zeal.
Well, what's up, everyone? My name is James Q. Quick, and I am a full-time technical content creator. And today's episode, we are sponsored by two amazing sponsors. First is Storyblock, who is a headless CMS that offers a unique combination of visual editing tools and customizable blocks, and story blocks, on top of a modern headless CMS architecture that gives you, the developers, the flexibility and speed to build whatever it is that you want. And fun fact, on my YouTube channel, the next couple of months, I will be having content using Storyblock. The first one, I believe, will be, or I'll do Storyblock with Svelte and Astro, and then I don't know what beyond that. Anyway, it should be a lot of fun. And then Rapid API is our second sponsor. They are the world's largest API hub, used by 3 million developers to find APIs, to connect to APIs, and to test their APIs with a single key and dashboard. Additionally, developers can create their own APIs and sell them for real money in the dashboard with a couple of configurations, which is actually really, really neat. I've got a few videos on working with Rapid API as well. People can check out on YouTube, including their Visual Studio Code extension where you can test your APIs, and it actually saves the APIs that you kind of create and document inside of there to the dashboard, and you can go back and forth across different devices, etc. So anyway, thank you both to Storyblock and Rapid API for sponsoring. And now, Todd, welcome onto the show. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about you?
Yeah, thank you. Great to be here. I am Todd Libby. I am a senior accessibility engineer. I currently work for a restaurant store, which is the Amazon of food and restaurant supplies, as I put it. Also am a invited expert at the W3C in accessibility. I am a little bit of DevRel in there for kind of like accessibility advocate in DevRel as well. And of course, everybody who knows me for the lobster. So I had to put that up there. And let's see what else. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and I do miss lobster rolls, but there's a place in Scottsdale I go, so I can get my fill. When I
originally from the Northeast, hence the
originally from the state
lobster.
of Maine, yes, where I could sit on and stare out into the ocean and have a lobster roll. That's what I miss. That's what I miss the most.
I was curious if you really said lobster or if you said lobster. Because when you showed your shirt.
We do say lobster, and that's that's part of the accent. The main accent is the foregoing of any R in some words. So lobster is chowder is another one. So yeah.
Good to know. I've not been to Maine, but I flew over Maine last time I was out of the country.
I highly recommend it. Yeah, I highly recommend it. And if you ever, decide to take a vacation, I can give you all the good spots to go. So
awesome.
So I know the lobster is a huge part of your brand, including the color red. And a couple of times I've seen you in person have these red shoes, which I don't know if I told you are like really sick. I really like those shoes. But another thing that I think about, and this is in a positive way, is every time you and Chris Demars, every time I post a picture on Twitter, to get the call out of having not added alt text to the image for people who may not be able to see the image or have color blindness and can't determine what's in the image. And the alt text is just a description to say, like, here's what's actually in the image. So at first, I guess I just want to say, like, I appreciate you being the person who's able to call people out, but in a respectful way. Cause I think it's easy to like be super, super pushy with stuff to the point where people don't get the message, if that makes sense. Like, if you don't do it in a good way, people are just going to like ignore you out of reluctancy. But I will say, I think I am in a fairly good habit. If you check the last 15 pictures that I posted on Twitter, I think it's a pretty good percentage for me in terms of like getting better and better about making sure I include all text. So thanks for always calling that out.
Well, us accessibility people can be a cranky lot, especially when it comes to certain things. Uh, Chris he can get a little cranky from some of the tweets I've seen, but yeah, we do it out of the love for making things accessible. So, and it's a gentle reminder to jump on that accessibility train, and and make sure everybody's included.
Yep. And it's still, I think, one of those topics that so many people, just for lack of awareness, don't know very much about. And it's one of those things, it's like a lot of things where unless you actually experience a disability that makes accessibility really important for yourself personally, or it's someone in your family or friend, that you can actually see the result of like somebody being frustrated by not being able to use a website or not being able to see the things that other people can see or read the things that other people can see, or not being able to navigate a website the way that they have to be able to do it to be able to interact with it. Unless you actually have experienced that either directly or through someone else, I think a lot of people really just don't know that this world of accessibility exists, to be quite honest. And that's why, again, like, the conversations are super helpful about it. Like you, Chris Mars, Amy has led episodes on this podcast about accessibility. So I'm always just trying to kind of take in this stuff around me, because I am still more naive than a lot of people, I think, of what we need to do to improve the web and make it more accessible. But I kind of try to start or continue to chip away at that, at the things that I learn along the way.
And it's that effort that we appreciate. Not only people that are in the accessibility space, but people that people with disabilities. And now I don't want to speak for everybody, but I'm sure there are people out there that appreciate that effort, that people are that want to learn, because there's not a lot of education out there.
Mm-hmm.
And up until recently, we haven't seen that education online, So we have sites like the W3C has a mini course on an intro to accessibility through edX. Marcy Sutton has her testingaccessibility.com. Sarah Soydan is coming out with practical accessibility at some point, which I've already pre-ordered, and would highly recommend people pre-order that as well. And there are courses on Udacity from Google. I think has the folks from web.dev, Rob Dodson being one of those. But we're seeing a lot more chances to learn and educational chances out there.
I think a big thing is, some people just think, oh, I don't know anything about accessibility, I'm not even going to mess with it. Like, it's something to do later down the road. But what surprised me, so I heard Todd speak at Magnolia JS, and part of your talk was you said you can get 90% of the way there with like 10 concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And those 10 things, I mean, obviously you don't want to just stop there. It'd be great if you could hit that 100% mark, but those 10 things were not difficult to do. It's things that in some ways are not common sense, but it does make sense. So for example, James was talking about adding alt tags to Twitter images. That's something, yeah, that makes sense. That will move you further down the road.
Yeah, and it's things like, if you're a designer, it's things like making sure color contrast is good. And I I think a lot of it is to go back to, when people are trying to learn about accessibility, they instantly go to the WCAG guidelines or are pointed to the WCAG guidelines, which is a very, right at this moment, I'm looking at the guidelines right now. It's a very technical manual of sorts, and it's written by people who, technical people. Um, so with that, if you're doing what James said with the alt text on Twitter for images. If you're doing color contrast and making sure contrast is more than sufficient for people. Um, there's other things too. Labels on forms. If you're a
Mm-hmm.
developer, that can be read by a screen reader and not using placeholders. Things like that. You're moving in the right direction.
Yep. Storybook has some stuff built in too. So if you are using Storybook as one of your dev tools, there's a panel at the bottom for accessibility, and it will check things like color contrast and stuff like that. Uh,
Yeah, that's a
key
great tool.
keyboard events. That's one that gets me when you're doing React and you have a bunch of stuff that's click handlers. You also want to make sure that you're accounting for the keyboard.
Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And tab through a site,
Mm-hmm.
tab through the work that you've done
Mm-hmm.
and make sure all interactive elements are reachable via keyboard. Make sure there's no keyboard traps. So,
Mm-hmm.
like in modals, if you get stuck in a modal, or
Mm-hmm.
recently I did an audit where there was a mega menu and I got stuck in the menu. You got to have a mechanism to escape out of that mega menu. It's little things like that, if you have that in the back of your mind, like I said, you're advancing, you're moving in the right direction. And
Mm-hmm.
Storybook is a great tool for that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you use Axe within Chrome?
I do use Axe. I'm more in Firefox than Chrome, actually.
Oh, interesting.
Uh, I
Do you find that it's more
I
accessible or it just has better tools?
I think the accessibility tools for Firefox are a lot better than Chrome, though I will use it's the Arc toolkit from TPGI. I'll use that in Chrome as one of my automated scanning tools, but I'm mainly in Firefox because the tools I think are a lot better.
Interesting. There's
And
a
there's
lot of
a
stuff with Firefox that I feel like are better that people just take for granted. Like the clip, I mean, these are not accessibility specific, but like their clip path and had better grid tools. There's some great developer tools within Firefox.
Yeah, and with the accessibility stuff, you can click on an option and it will show the tab order. You can simulate, color simulation, color
Oh,
vision
nice.
simulator. Um, so it's, I think, a lot better. Don't get me wrong, Chrome's tools are great. Chrome's dev tools are great.
Mm-hmm.
I just think Firefox right now has the edge as far as accessibility goes.
Mm-hmm. Um, can I pivot and ask you a personal question? And you
Sure.
can decline to answer if you'd like. But I think what surprised me about your talk at Magnolia JS, I'll just reference that again, was when you talked about somebody that had tweeted and said, I just got a message from my dad. He's blind and he was just trying to use the internet for a day. And every site that was inaccessible to him just further said to him that he was not welcome in the world. And that's just like, that's hurt. Like you can hear the pain in that, not only for that person that is blind, but also for the daughter that really doesn't want that for her father. So I feel like a lot of people that, and maybe this is a huge assumption on my end, that are like ingrained in accessibility really are advocating for people because they have a personal story. So do you have a personal story that brought you into accessibility?
Yes, friends, family members,
Mm,
seeing looks on faces of people that are ready to give up
mm,
uh, when they can't access something that should be accessible on the web. That's
mm-hmm,
the main reason. Um, just that look of frustration, and like you can see even anger,
Mm,
that they feel like they're being shut out, and listening and hearing from people with disabilities that the same thing, like they feel like they're being just pushed to the side and being left out. And I feel that's in not, and even Tim Berners-Lee says it himself, you know, the web was made for everybody, the internet
mm,
was made for everybody, not just for people like, you know, him or I, you know, uh everybody,
hmm.
regardless of disability. So
Yeah.
And
Um,
talking about friends and personal stories, and Chris Mars has talked about this in the talk, so I think it's okay to share. But I saw him talk at KCDC maybe last year, and it was all about the impact. I think it's his mother that had some disabilities that made it very personal for him. And again, like I think that's like in a lot of, not to get to political stance, but a lot of where like we have these divides between people on very strong opinions, not necessarily politics, just like really strong opinions. It's just like the lack of understanding because we've never experienced the things that other people have experienced. And so listening to him, that was one of the first times where it became more personal to me because it was more personal for him. And I was like starting to understand more of the frustrations that people go through from not being able to use things the way that they would like to.
definitely. And I will go back to 2019 when I heard Chris at UX Burlington in Burlington, Vermont. Um, and he was giving a talk on focus indicators, and he mentioned the same thing with his mother, and I think he does that in most of his, if
Mhm.
not all of his
Yep.
talks, which that's something we try, as far as, you know, some of the people I know who talk about accessibility at conferences, we try to give the audience some you know, story of our experience, whether it be us or whether it be with somebody like a family member or friend. So yeah, his talk actually that year really pushed me even further into accessibility. So I always thank him for that.
Yep.
And I think he knows that, you know, that kind of lit the fire again under
Mhm.
me. So
I'm kind of I'm kind of curious. I realized as I talked about having alt text and I was explaining why, I realized I don't actually have a great understanding of why because I kind of fumbled. I don't know if people saw me hesitate as I explained why. So I'm curious that, like you mentioned, top three things earlier. So there was color contrast, there was alt text on images, and then there was labels on form elements. I think it was three things that you mentioned earlier on. Do you mind walking through each one of those and just giving an example of like, if not done well, here's what people with this disability experience or can't experience because we're not supporting them? Does that make sense?
yeah, sure. So low contrast of text. I mean, I'm looking at the WebA Million report right now, and that's been the number one issue for you know, it measures here for from 2019 to this year, and that's 4 straight years. That's been the number
Mm,
one accessibility issue online, and it may go it may go further back than that, you know, further than back
mhm,
than 2019. So you have text that's a color, and you have a background color. So as the way it's the that color contrast is calculated now, it is the contrast of that text on that background color. So in there's different cases where it needs to be a certain ratio, but the contrast minimum is 4.5 to 1 on text that is 18 pixels or more.
mhm,
So there are color contrast checkers out there that people can use. I always recommend the color contrast analyzer by TPGI. That's a good one. Or even if you use Wave, which is from WebAIM, that extension has a color contrast checker in there as well. But if you want that text to be 4.5 to 1 ratio or higher. And I always tell people, just don't stop at, double A standards. Go from more than that. And there are issues with white text on a black background and vice versa, where can cause blurring around the edges of text. So you don't want to use straight black on white, white on black. So basically, you want the contrast to be high enough so that people with low vision can make out and read that text on the site. So something like a gray background, a darker gray color is probably not going to cut it. It's not going to be readable by somebody with low vision. So you want to make sure, that's at a sufficient contrast ratio. Missing alt text for images that convey something like a picture of, and I'm going to go to my default, a picture of a lobster roll.
Wouldn't have it any other way.
You want to convey what's in that picture, a lobster roll with a Coca-Cola and some French fries. That alt text will be read by a screen reader to a blind user, and they'll understand what's in that picture. So, and there's a lot of different views on what alt text should contain. And for me, it's just as long as the alt text is clear, concise, and conveys what's in that picture, then you're probably good. It can be, some people say, oh, you should be 150 characters. Or, with the NASA picture of the space, with the Webb telescope picture, I mean, that thing was long. But that alt text for that picture was, I would say, spot on. Because it conveyed what's in that picture. If you're go ahead.
So that's been one of the things that I've questioned for myself, because I would say when I do alt text, which is more and more, my descriptions are not very long, and that's still kind of not fully understanding what it's like to be on the other end. So a lot of times I kind of see my alt text being a repeat of what's in a tweet, for example, and I kind of struggle just from kind of lack of experience, I guess, of like, how do I make this more valuable for someone where it actually provides more context than what the text that they already have access to in the tweet gives them? And I have also looked at other images with alt text and seen how big some people do, like how long of a description. And I'm like, oh, so there's like a whole nother world of this. Like doing it is not all of it. It's like doing it and then doing it better is an even better story, I guess.
Yeah, there's no real hard guideline to alt text.
Yeah.
Basically, it's those 3 C's that I mentioned: clear, concise, and convey that meaning.
Yep.
And that's something that people who use screen readers will thank you for. I mean, I just had somebody thank me yesterday on Mastodon because I was using descriptive text for my images. And I even have I follow a bot, which if I don't have alt text, it will say, hey, delete it, redraft it, and then toot it. I don't like toot. Toot it back out. And I do that when I do forget. And I do forget. And there's kind of a thing where I have the cross poster thing from Twitter to Mastodon and vice versa. And when I retweet something on Twitter and it goes to Mastodon, it doesn't take the alt text with it. It's just some weird thing. So I get that all the time. But the alt text, clear, concise, convey the meaning, and you're probably good. And I would actually challenge developers to try and use a screen reader. You have VoiceOver on Mac built in. NVDA is free. That if you're a Windows user, there's Orca on Linux, and I would challenge you to use that. There are a lot of different resources to learn how to use a screen reader online, and there's a lot of resources to how to hotkeys and what key combinations to use for those screen readers. DQ University being one of those resources. So try to use a screen reader, and if you are having problems, ask the accessibility community. We're more than happy to help. So that's what I would say about alt text. Missing form labels is also for screen reader users. That signifies that, oh, this is a search box. Here's where I'm going to do my search for what I want to find on this website. So again, the other day when I was doing an audit, it's just placeholders. And placeholders, while they look cool in the design, they will be announced duplicate and sometimes in triplicate if there's an accessible name with the form input. So you're going to hear search and then search and then search or search button if there's the button for search if you got to click the button.
So do you not like placeholder text at all?
No, placeholders are for silverware, I think. And I tweeted that out the other day, and somebody messaged me and was like, that was a good analogy. And I said, well, that kind of goes back to my analogy on carousels, which is a totally different topic, but carousels are for circuses and fairs, not for websites.
I wasn't even thinking about the accessibility behind a carousel.
They can be accessible. There's a lot of work you have to put behind it, but they can be accessible. So I'm loosening my stance on carousels, but placeholders definitely no.
So let me ask you this: would you do a placeholder instead of a label? Can you use those interchangeably? Because then it's just announcing it once.
That's a question I had actually.
So and I can't remember where I saw it, but I saw a form that used JavaScript, and when you clicked in the field, the placeholder disappeared, but then it went to above the input field.
Yeah, that's basically Google material.
Yeah. But here's why I don't think placeholders are useful. When you click in a form field and it has something like whatever it says in there, somebody with a cognitive issue could forget what they are looking at. What do I need to type in this form field, especially in a long form? So there lies the problem with me anyways, where you have that cognitive piece that goes along with the screen reader piece. I think it just causes more problems than not. Now you can have a label, you can hide the label, but have that label accessible if it comes down to the design. But I always suggest that use a visible label, because then you have the piece where somebody may not know what that form field is for if you don't have that visible label. And that goes along with error messages too. Error messages should be visible and should be announced with a screen reader.
And it shouldn't be based on just color. So
Correct.
From a UI standpoint, there's a lot of overlap here. So I want to tie a bow on the label thing. That's something that we talk about when we're doing design work, is that even if somebody doesn't have, say, a cognitive disability and can remember, oh yeah, my name's going to go here, my phone number is going to go here, even if you have, say, an error at the top that says your phone number is wrong, well, if you put your phone number in the wrong field, or if you're trying to scan back through, and like you can't remember what every field is for if that was just based on placeholder. Like you need that label text there. And then to your point in terms of error messages, a lot of times it seems like the easy design solution is to highlight the field in red or change the background color of that field to red, but not all people can see red the way other people can. So
Right.
you don't, a lot of times when I'm designing, error messages will include a symbol, but even that's not the best accessible thing. The best accessible thing is to also have text there that says exactly what the issue is.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. On short forms where it's maybe a few fields, 2 or 3 fields, sure, you can have that inline error message. On a very long form, for instance, have that error message up at the top. So then if somebody needs to scroll back through, they can start from the
Yep.
top and work their way down.
You also have to make sure, because I've coded forms before and found issues when I'm like testing. Whereas if you hit submit and then the error message is at the top, but you don't scroll to
You
the
don't
top,
scroll. I was just gonna
then
say
you
that.
don't
Yeah.
realize that there is an error message there. So you have to build that in as well.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I feel like this is in all different areas of knowledge, I guess, but like something as simple as a form, and some Will is commenting how deep and detailed the conversation is on labels and placeholders. Forms are easy. I'm using quotes for people that are listening to the audio after the fact, right? Like you get started, people, that's one of the first things they learn, and they learn to build a form, and for the most part, you got it, right? Like as long as the information goes as you're testing to where you want it to go, you got it. But then you get down to like this level of detail. And as soon as Todd, you said have the errors at the top, really long form, I immediately jumped to, because I've been on websites that do this. They tell you at the bottom, like either they don't give feedback that the submit button didn't work, or they say down there something went wrong, but you have to scroll all the way up to know like exactly what went wrong to then go back down through the form to find the particular item and then update it. So it gets like actually controlling that experience, especially for people with different disabilities, or just like people that don't have them, like controlling that experience in a way that is intuitive and actually makes sense is not an easy thing to do.
Right.
Sorry,
And
I
I
have to-
see that I put it at the bottom near the button, which is fine, but then you have to think about what about somebody with a motor skill disability? And now they got to go all the way to the top to fill in something, or near the top, and then they got to go back down. That could take some lengthy period of time if they have a motor skill disability that affects them. So that's why I say put it at the top. And then you have, you submit the form. The errors happen. They appear. The field is at the top with all the errors that you have. Then they can scroll to the top, work their way down as they are comfortable with doing that. No matter how much time they take.
I have another question for you in terms of form submission. Is there a
Okay.
difference in accessibility for client side validation versus server side validation?
That's a good question.
While you're
I can-
thinking, I can
I was-
explain to the
I was
group
gonna
what
say-
I'm talking about. So,
Sure.
for example, right now with Felt, there's some really cool stuff where you can process forms on the client side, or you can. So that means that in your browser, it's going through and saying, does this email work? Does this name, have they filled it out? Does the phone number match the format that I want? Things like that. You can handle all that within JavaScript in the browser. Or you can also hand that over to the server, and Remix actually handles everything on the server. So what that means is your information goes out and then it comes back. So the server will look at all the data that you tried to send it and say, no, that's not what I need. And then it sends it back to the browser. So there's a complete page refresh sometimes if you're going to the server and then coming back, versus if you're handling it in the browser, it can do that without making that extra trip.
And
So-
Remix does have the ability to
Hot reload.
turn off the
reload.
page refresh idea. So it actually looks
Yeah.
like it's doing client side validated data, which I also think, I'm not 100% sure on this. I also think in their tutorials, they have a section on how to do both of those things
Oh, interesting.
to do client side validation. And my take, and then Todd, I'll let you jump in if you've had time to think about it now. But My guess is from a I don't know about accessibility, but from a user experience, like you're going to get quicker information about feedback on the client and providing that stuff in line where it's making sure obviously that it preserves all the data as is and then just pops up with a message. That's one noticeable thing I would think that would be good. It's just like you're not having to make the full round trip. You're not seeing a page refresh, et cetera. But that gets more complicated with things like Remix that mix those and then kind of send stuff off to the server, but then you don't even notice on the front end.
Well, I guess one of the reasons I'm curious about it, maybe this isn't even the right reason to be curious about it, is if the page refreshes, then you're sent truly to the top of the page versus, say, maybe the top of the form.
So I think in either case, it depends on how it's written and handled. So somebody could do it one way and it could be a very accessible experience, and somebody could do it the other way and have the same experience be very accessible. So I think if I were to have to pick one, I really couldn't, because it's just in the way it's handled, in the way it's written. That's in the developer's hands.
So
It could be very inaccessible.
is there a way to announce that? Like if you're using a screen reader and you click on the button to say like immediately form was submitted successfully, or we found an error message. Is there something that you can do there to control the experience?
You can. That gets into a little. That's out of my realm.
Okay.
Currently, because it's been a while since I've actually done that, since I've written anything like that. But I know it can be done, just as long as there's no fundamental shift or change in the content of the page, or none. Then it's accessible. It doesn't break the guideline of on input, which is, if you go look at, it's in here somewhere, I know, 3.2.2 on input, which is basically changing the setting of any user interface component does not automatically cause a change of context. So I should actually... A form would be a control, so yeah.
Interesting.
That's the way I interpret it.
So as we're doing this, I'm having a live. I guess it is an accessibility thing. So someone on YouTube commented with an icon, and if people are watching the stream on YouTube, I think it comes through. But the comment that comes to us inside of StreamYard, I can't see the icon, and so I actually asked the person like, what is the icon that's there, and they said what it is, and then said it shows up on YouTube. So this would be like a great example of, I don't know how this would be incorporated, but like if there was alt text for that emoji, I think is probably what it is, that would give me the context that I would be missing, because for whatever reason, like it just didn't translate to coming into the comment section in StreamYard.
Yeah, and that's how the character is handled on this platform. And that happens with using special characters on the web. If you use the vertical pipe, for instance, sometimes that does not show up if the
interesting.
page is not. Let's see if I can remember correctly. I think it depends upon, because in HTML4, dating myself a little bit here, you used to use an ISO in the head of your document. No, in the up at the top of the document. So, you'll see that little block like you're seeing on here, on this platform, StreamYard. So if you use and it's not really for emojis, it's more for HTML entities. If you use the and whatever, like for instance, how can I do this? And MIDDOT semicolon will give you a little bullet, and it'll be in the middle. So if you take a look at my website down at the bottom, you'll see the use of that special character down there, and that should show up hopefully in most, if not all, modern browsers. So it's also the way the browser renders that special character.
And someone will in the chat mentioned being curious about icons, emojis in Slack and web apps, emoji reactions, etc., that seem to work with assistive devices. And this is actually a topic that I kind of looked into for a while out of curiosity, and I think I took for granted of not even thinking about how this stuff worked. But different encodings and character sets is what I think all of that comes down to. And I don't know names, so don't quote me on anything, but there's attempts to make character sets and encodings more universal for tools like that, so that the emojis will render appropriately on all the different platforms. But you send an emoji, or you have an emoji, you send a text, and you never, at a surface level, you never think about how that actually gets sent or what the data looks like in terms of, or as opposed to how it gets rendered. But it all comes down to how it's encoded and what character set is being used to determine what emojis and things are available to be rendered.
Yeah, and that's also the same thing with people that own Android phones that I know will send me an emoji, and I can't see it on my iPhone.
Yep.
So, and vice versa. So yeah, and I see that somebody in the chat is saying there's a person on Twitch. Yes, that's the one. That's, I think, the most accessible thing you can do is if you can't, if their assistive technology does not handle emojis, and, emojis aren't handled real well with some assistive technologies, they need to do what they need to do for it to have that accessible experience.
And the audio piece of this, for people that are listening on the podcast, the published podcast, Gooseman shared that there's a person that he follows on Twitch that advocates for blind gamers, and they ban all emotes, all emote usage in their channel because it's not accessible to them. So people that are listening in to a stream, I guess they maybe have like a screen reader for chat as it comes in, if they're paying attention to the chat comments. I would assume that would be part of it. But then they wouldn't be able to, they wouldn't have the context, exactly like we kind of just talked about, for the emojis. So they wouldn't know what those reactions were. So as opposed to sending a happy face, I guess the people would react by saying, "I'm happy," or something like that. I don't know.
What's really cool, I'm going to highlight Eric. So that's Gooseman. We've had him on the podcast before, and he developed a closed caption translator thing. So as you're talking, it creates closed captions, and that's being used on platforms like Zoom or Twitch and things like that. And he has several schools that are using that for accessibility purposes. So Eric, you can feel free to share a link in the chat to your project. I want to ask one more other question that I'm kind of curious about. Don't you love it? So I know, Todd, that you are on the board for accessibility and W3C. So how do you decide this is a topic that we need to consider, or this is a problem, and how do you go about trying to solve that?
So I'm not on a board.
Okay.
I am a member of some groups and subgroups.
Perfect. Okay.
In the W3C.
Cool.
Just want to make that I'm not up there with
you decide what goes in the browser, right?
No, I do not, thankfully. No, I don't want that responsibility. So we get together, we have meetings, and in our meetings we discuss topics. So I will highlight the topics that we are discussing about WCAG 2.2, which has been pushed to next year. and we try to work through as a group and come to some sort of consensus as to, okay, is this something that will be beneficial to putting in the next set of guidelines? So it's pretty much, companies and individuals that come into the W3C, and we discuss all these items, and then, resolutions are made, and this whole, process of getting these into some sort of standardization. And then the process of getting them to being a standard. So right now, as it stands, I think 2.2 is still, WCAG 2.2 is still in candidate recommendation. Yes. So if you go to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.2, you'll see the blue kind of like vertical banner that says W3C candidate recommendation, and then you can read about where it is and what that means. And it's there in, so in the W3C, we, for the betterment of accessibility, we try to make things, come to decisions that will benefit everybody. And for WCAG 3, which is still quite a ways, few years down the road, we want to make it more understandable for people, because that's one of the four main tenets of accessibility is understandable. So you have perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. It's poor. Those are the four tenets, or the foundation of accessibility. Understanding those documents for people that are new to accessibility are important. People that want to learn about accessibility, it's plain language and clear language is very important for people to understand that. So it's not a paid job. It's a lot of meetings. It's a lot of time, discussing things. But in the end, it's something that I can do to give back to the community, for all the learning I've done through all the people that I've learned from. So that's how I, I decided, maybe joining the W3C and helping out in accessibility and trying to do something to pay back the community for what the community has given to me.
That's great.
Did that answer the question? Because
Yeah.
I just feel like I went totally off road here.
Yeah, it did. It did. I'm just fascinated by how people decide what gets incorporated in the browser or what becomes considered a standard. And so I don't think that people always take that into consideration, that there's lots of people behind those decisions and there's lots of meetings and lots of conversations. So
Yeah, and so the standards for web browsers, I believe, is done through Igalia. Igalia? I want to double check that. And by the way, I do use Gooseman's captioning for
do
my
you?
streams.
Oh, that's awesome.
I think it's awesome.
He's a coworker at Zeal.
Nice, very nice, and it's a great product. And even though it hates my Northeast Maine accent, it's come up with some pretty interesting things to it. So Igalia, I know they are a big part of the browser landscape. So I don't know a lot to comment any further than that on that.
Is that IGALIA?
Yes. Yeah, I know that, let's see. I want to say, okay, so Alex Boxhall's on there. Brian Cardell, who's another person I follow, and Eric Meyer being one. If anybody knows who Eric
Yep.
Meyer is, he was a lot of CSS back in the day,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, he's big.
You're
he
dating us
works-
again, Todd.
I am. I remember when there was no CSS, so that I go even further back.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
coding.
I came in
coding-
like CSS 1. So you could do a
was
little
before
bit, but yeah.
Never heard of it.
I was before. I was working in Mosaic browsers. Let's just. I'll
good.
stop that far back.
Oh,
feel
But yeah,
so-
Agalia is. I think they're the big entity that does the browser stuff.
awesome.
But there's also a whole thing with that, so they
Yeah.
decide what to do.
Cool. This is one of those awkward moments. Todd, we did not prep you, I don't think, for picks and plugs. Do you have a something you could pick or something you could plug?
I can plug my podcast on YouTube and on your podcast app of choice. It's the Front End Nerdery podcast. I just wrapped up season 2, and just a sneak peek for everybody. Amy and James, you sat in with me and my new co-host next year, Homer Gaines, and we did a little, I think it was like 15-minute little discussion there while we were in London. So I'm working on that soon to get that out by the end of the year. But there's that. It's at youtube.com/frontendnerdery or at frontendnerdery. I have the handle for it now. Picks. So everybody was raving about this, so I had to pick it up. And it's the Spotlight Presentation Remote from Logitech. I'll just put it right there. I tested it out. It's really cool, really great. So if you give talks or presentations, that's definitely something. And I want to also, if I can, one more pick, because this stuff is amazing. And I had done this, I think, when you and James, you were doing your live podcast at Magnolia. But this stuff right here,
Yeah. Whooshy,
this
or
is
whoosh.
magic.
What is that?
So you spray it on this cloth, right? And you wipe down your monitors, phones. It cleans it. I mean, this stuff is magical. So definitely recommend Whoosh. It's at whoosh.com.
Yeah. I heard Wes Boss recommend it, and he pitched it as the Norwex of computer clean wipes.
That's
So,
yeah. I also got that from Wes. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. So James, do you have any picks and plugs?
I do. I feel like the theme as we've done this podcast is more and more of my picks come with trying to not be so old physically. And this one it's like a massage ball. It's kind of like the size of a lacrosse ball, but it's got ridges in it. And so if people have ever used like foam rollers to roll out your legs or back or something like that, one of the difficulties with that is you can't really isolate certain muscles to try to loosen up. Like it just goes all the way across and it's kind of uniform, so you can't like dig into specific areas, as I'm like wiggling around on video. So anyway, this is just like, it's a ball. It's like the size of a lacrosse ball. It's in the bedroom, I think. And it has the ridges in there, and then you can just put it in very specific locations and kind of roll out. So I've been using it a lot for my back and hamstrings, and I think it's been helpful. So a friend of mine had it when I went to work out at his house like 3 weeks ago, a month, maybe 3 weeks. And I went and bought one like the next day. So I've been using that a lot recently. I actually took it with me to London, and I thought I would maybe use it on the plane, but it's kind of awkward because you actually have to like move around on the ball to like stretch out those muscles, and that would be weird to do like on a plane next to some. Anyway, but yeah, it's still is pretty cool. So it's like $25 on Amazon, and then I'll plug the Learn Build Teach community. So I've been doing some work on the website and the Discord bot, and I want to do a lot next year. That's going to be a big focus for me, is using that platform to hopefully engage people more and then share the content that people create in that community more. So learnbuildteach.com for that.
James, do you have a massage gun?
We do, yeah. We have a
Okay.
Hypervolt or Hyper Ice. I forget which
Okay.
is the brand and which is the actual model, but
Yeah. I don't have one, but my dad has one, and that's been fantastic for isolating
yeah.
muscles and things like that. So I'm gonna go analog with my pick and plug. I don't think I've picked this before, but I'm a pin snob. Oh, it's not gonna focus. And I only use the Pilot G207 pins, but these are fantastic pins. They just write really well, and I've used these exclusively for maybe 20 years. So I love them, but definitely check them out. And then I'm going to plug Advent of CSS and Advent of JavaScript. So this is a series of 24 challenges that James and I created last year, and then we're re-releasing them this year. So if you did them last year, you can still do it if you didn't finish last year or you want to go back through them. But it's been really fun just to see positive response online and people working through these challenges again. So all the content's still current, still relevant. So definitely go check that out at Advent of CSS or Advent of JavaScript.com.
Sweet. All right, that's gonna wrap it up for this episode. We've been kind of doing some planning for what the podcast is gonna look like in the next year, and maybe we'll share some of those updates sometime soon. But we're looking forward to continue the podcast next year and bring on another round of amazing guests. So we hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, make sure to leave a rating review in your podcatcher of choice. In the meantime, that's all we got. So speaking of pens, I don't even think I know how to write anymore. Like how often do you actually write? Like I just don't at all.
Sorry. Oh, you're talking to me.
Either one of you. I don't know. That's just
sorry, and I
writing
was
is uncomfortable now.
I was also distracted by Jason. So if you look at Jason Spatial, another coworker, he was making a nice pun. You whoosh, you could get some for Christmas.
Oh, nice.
With the wipes. Okay.
Nicely done.
I thought you meant like writing in the verb. Right, like on the computer or whatever. So I have a stack of Post-it notes. Thank you. I have a stack of Post-it notes by my computer, and I will just like line up the Post-it notes and use those sometimes as to-dos. So as I'm going through the day, as I process stuff, I'll just throw them in the trash can. So anyways, I do still write quite a bit.
I don't. I just everything.
But you have the Remark tablet. Do you use that a lot?
No.
No.
I can't remember if I gave it away or not, but
Oh, really?
I offered to give it away. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I spent a lot of money on it and didn't use it at all.
Oh.
I tried though. Yeah. Anyway.
I don't know if you can see him, but I'm a Field Notes
Oh yeah.
snob, top shelf there. Oh, I get subscriptions, and they're having a deal today. Todd's going to buy about 10 more packages.
Is that the colored? What's the colored books? Those almost look like Event Apart books.
Right here?
Yeah.
Yes, those are a book apart books.
A book apart.
Like,
yep.
This is the newest one from Mike
Awesome.
Montero. It's
His stuff's really
edition.
good.
Yeah.
His stuff's really good.
Those are a book apart books.
And they have a
And
few on accessibility too, right?
Just one.
Okay.
There are some books do mention accessibility in them, but just one from Laura Kalbag,
Okay.
accessibility for everyone. I had pitched a book to them for accessibility, but they passed on it. So
Bummer.
oh well.
That would be another place where we could date ourselves is Jeffrey Zeldman and his contribution to education and the web.
Yes, he was my first episode. We actually talked
Really?
for yes, he I've known Jeffrey since 2018.
Okay.
And we talked, and then we were like, he had a hard stop, and he's like, well, can we do this again? And I'm like, sure, just let me know and I'll make this a 2-part episode. So my
Yeah.
first episode ever was a 2-part episode
Oh, that's
with Jeffrey Zeldman. Definitely a awesome person, wonderful human being, and he was one of the people behind Blue Beanie Day, which was yesterday. No, sorry, was Wednesday, to promote web standards. So
Yeah, when I think about him, I think of his avatar with the blue beanie on it.
yes, and that's from this one.
There you go.
Yep. So he's if anybody can find this in a thrift shop, and he's got 3 different editions, pick it up. Even though it's dated, pick it up, because you will learn. There will be something in there you will learn. I can guarantee it.
Love it. Love it.
But other than that, I have my cookbooks and everything.
Lots of lobster recipes, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Or do you just know all those by memory?
I have a lot of those in memory, because when I was an executive head chef, we had lobster was on the menu. So
I did not realize that that you were
yes,
a head chef. Wow.
yes.
Gooseman
I was in the
is
restaurant
hungry.
industry for 20 years
Wow.
while doing web work with 2 kids being a single dad.
Oh my goodness.
Oh wow, that's wild.
That's very respectable.
One of our
That's
big community leaders here recently, like last 5 years, got into tech, and he was in the restaurant industry for 25 years or something leading up to that.
It's a very hard lifestyle.
I was going to say hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very tough.
Hence a lot of the gray hair.
I've got a few. I've got like some here, and then I see like a couple occasionally here. I don't like it.
When I grow out the beard, I like to say this is all because of PHP 3, 4, and 5. So
And then there was JavaScript.
yes, and then there was JavaScript. That's a whole.
It's like that could contribute a little bit too before
little bit of
pre
both,
TypeScript.
probably. Yeah.
Pre TypeScript.
Yeah. Yep.
Cool. All right. For people that are on Twitch, I am gonna raid you over to Nikki T. Did I do that right?
I'm gonna have to go visit Nick after
I
this.
didn't do that right.
Throw up some
Oh, I
lobster
misspelled it.
emojis.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to raid people on Twitch over to Nikki T, who is pretty awesome. And then for everybody else on YouTube that don't have a raid mechanism, we'll just call it here. So thanks everyone for checking in. Really appreciate you being here.
Yeah. Thank you.